The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the community center's main hall, casting harsh shadows across folding tables arranged in perfect rows. Speed dating night at the Riverside Community Center wasn't exactly where most people expected to see Marcus Thompson, the 42-year-old CEO of Thompson Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the West Coast. But there he was, adjusting his son's wheelchair and checking his watch with the nervous energy of a man completely out of his element. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 12-year-old Dylan Thompson sat in his custom racing wheelchair, fingers drumming against the armrests as he surveyed the room with sharp, intelligent eyes. His dark hair was perfectly styled, courtesy of his father's meticulous morning routine, and he wore a button-down shirt that made him look older than his years. The wheelchair itself was a work of art, midnight blue with silver racing stripes that Dylan had insisted on when they'd ordered it 6 months ago. Marcus had never imagined he'd be here. 3 years ago, he'd been married to Sarah, living in their sprawling house in Pacific Heights, focused entirely on building his empire. Then came the accident, the months in the hospital, the divorce papers served while Dylan was still learning to navigate his new reality. Sarah had said she couldn't handle it, couldn't watch their son struggle every day. She'd moved to Portland with her new boyfriend, leaving Marcus to figure out how to be both mother and father to a boy who'd gone from star athlete to wheelchair user overnight. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus Thompson, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and command boardrooms full of intimidating executives, felt completely helpless when it came to helping his son find connection. Dylan was brilliant, funny, and resilient in ways that constantly amazed Marcus, but making friends had become nearly impossible. Kids at school either treated him like he was made of glass or avoided him entirely. The few playdates Marcus had arranged had been awkward disasters, with parents speaking in hushed, pitying tones while their children stared. That's when Marcus's sister Emma had suggested the most ridiculous idea he'd ever heard. Speed dating? Marcus had laughed into his phone, pacing his office while Emma explained her logic. You want me to bring my 12-year-old son to adult speed dating? Not adult speed dating, Emma had corrected. Community speed networking. It's different. People of all ages come to meet others in the area. Neighbors, potential friends, business connections. They have it once a month at the community center. Marcus had initially dismissed the idea completely, but that night, watching Dylan eat dinner alone while scrolling through videos of other kids playing sports he'd never play again, something shifted. Dylan needed to see that he could still connect with people, that his wheelchair didn't define his worth. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus needed to learn the same lesson. So here they were, father and son, completely out of place among the usual crowd of divorced neighbors and lonely retirees looking for bridge partners. Marcus wore his most casual outfit, dark jeans and a gray sweater, hoping to blend in. It wasn't working. His watch alone probably cost more than most people here made in a month, and his posture screamed corporate executive even when he was trying to relax. Dylan, meanwhile, was handling the situation with typical grace. "Dad, you look like you're about to give a presentation to shareholders," he said, grinning up at his father. "Try to breathe." The event coordinator, a cheerful woman in her 50s named Patricia, bustled over with a clipboard and an overly bright smile. "Welcome, first time." She glanced down at Dylan, and her expression softened with that familiar look Marcus had come to dread, the mixture of surprise and pity that people wore when they encountered his son. "Yes," Marcus replied curtly, positioning himself slightly between Patricia and Dylan. "We're here for networking." "Of course, how wonderful." Patricia's voice took on that sing-song quality people used with children and pets. "And what brings you both here tonight?" Before Marcus could answer, Dylan spoke up. "We're looking for people who aren't weird about wheelchairs," he said matter-of-factly. "Dad thinks I need more friends, but mostly he needs to learn how to talk to people without mentioning quarterly earnings." Patricia blinked, clearly not expecting such directness from a 12-year-old. Marcus felt his cheeks redden, but Dylan just smiled innocently. "Well," Patricia recovered, "I'm sure you'll both find exactly what you're looking for. The format is simple. 5 minutes per table, then rotate. There are conversation starters at each table if you need them." As Patricia moved on to greet other newcomers, Marcus crouched down to Dylan's level. "You sure about this, buddy? We can leave if you want." Dylan's expression grew serious for a moment. "Dad, I know you're scared. I know you think people are going to be weird about me being here. But you can't protect me from everything. Sometimes we have to let people surprise us." The wisdom in his son's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. When had Dylan become so much wiser than him? When had their roles reversed so completely that his 12-year-old was the one offering life advice? The bell rang, signaling the start of the first round. Marcus positioned Dylan's wheelchair at table 3, then took the seat beside him. Across from them sat an elderly couple, Harold and Marge, who immediately launched into a detailed description of their prize-winning tomato garden. Dylan listened politely, asking thoughtful questions about soil composition and watering schedules that impressed the couple far more than anything Marcus contributed to the conversation. Table 4 brought Janet, a real estate agent who spent the entire 5 minutes trying to convince Marcus to buy investment property while completely ignoring Dylan. Marcus found himself growing increasingly irritated, not because Janet was pushy about business, but because she acted as if Dylan wasn't even there. At table 5, they met Robert, a recently divorced accountant who seemed genuinely interested in Dylan's insights about adaptive sports. Dylan lit up talking about wheelchair basketball and racing, and for a moment Marcus relaxed. This was going better than expected. But then came table 6. The woman sitting across from them was probably in her early 30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and tired eyes. She wore a simple blue dress and kept checking her phone nervously. When they sat down, she barely looked up from her screen. "Hi," Marcus said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. "I'm Marcus. This is my son Dylan." "Jennifer," she replied without looking up. "Sorry, I'm just waiting for a very important call about work." Dylan, ever the diplomat, tried to engage. "What kind of work do you do?" "Teaching," Jennifer answered absently, still focused on her phone. "Middle school. Look, I don't really have time for small talk tonight. I just came because my sister insisted I needed to get out more after my breakup." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. It was one thing for adults to be rude to him, but completely ignoring Dylan was unacceptable. He was about to suggest they move on early when Dylan surprised him. "What subject do you teach?" Dylan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice despite Jennifer's obvious disinterest. Jennifer finally looked up, her eyes immediately going to the wheelchair. Her expression shifted slightly. Not with pity, but with something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Science," she said slowly. "7th grade earth science." "That's so cool," Dylan said, his face lighting up. "I love geology." "Did you know that the San Andreas Fault runs right through California? And we're basically sitting on 2 different tectonic plates right now?" For the first time that evening, Jennifer put her phone down completely. She studied Dylan's face, and Marcus could see her making some kind of internal calculation. "You're right," she said quietly. "Most adults don't know that." "Most adults don't pay attention to the really interesting stuff," Dylan replied with a grin. "Like, everyone worries about earthquakes, but they don't realize how amazing it is that we can actually predict some of them now using seismographs and satellite data." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "You know about seismograph technology?" "I know about lots of things," Dylan said simply. "Having to sit still a lot gives you time to read." The comment hung in the air for a moment. Marcus watched Jennifer's face carefully, waiting for the inevitable awkwardness that usually followed any reference to Dylan's disability. But instead of looking uncomfortable, Jennifer's expression grew thoughtful. "That's actually a really smart way to look at it," she said. "I bet you know things that other kids your age have never even thought about." Dylan's smile widened. "Want to hear about black holes?" And just like that, the conversation took off. Jennifer forgot about her phone entirely as Dylan launched into an explanation of event horizons and gravitational time dilation that was somehow both scientifically accurate and completely accessible. Marcus found himself fading into the background, watching in amazement as his son commanded the attention of an adult who had initially been too distracted to notice him. The 5-minute bell rang, but neither Dylan nor Jennifer seemed to hear it. They were deep in discussion about the possibility of life on Mars when Patricia approached their table. "Time to rotate," Patricia announced cheerfully. Jennifer looked genuinely disappointed. "Already?" she turned to Dylan. "That was the most interesting conversation I've had in months." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Same," Dylan replied, then hesitated. "Maybe we could talk more sometime? I mean, if you want to." Marcus held his breath. This was the moment that usually went wrong. When adults made polite excuses or promises they had no intention of keeping. Jennifer pulled out her phone, not to check messages, but to open her contacts. "What's your dad's number?" "I'd love to continue this conversation, and I think you might enjoy visiting my classroom sometime. We have some pretty cool equipment." As Marcus dictated his phone number, he caught Dylan's expression in his peripheral vision. His son was practically glowing with excitement, but trying to play it cool. It was the same look he used to get before big baseball games, back when baseball was still possible. They moved to table 7, but Marcus barely heard what the next person was saying. He kept thinking about the genuine interest in Jennifer's voice, the way she'd looked at Dylan like he was fascinating rather than fragile. Most importantly, she'd seen past the wheelchair to the brilliant, curious kid underneath. When the evening ended, Dylan was quiet during the drive home, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Not the heavy silence of disappointment, but the contemplative quiet of someone processing something important. "So," Marcus finally said as they pulled into their driveway, "what did you think?" Dylan was quiet for another moment, then said, "I think Emma was right. Sometimes you have to take risks to find the good stuff." Marcus turned off the engine and looked at his son. "And Jennifer?" "She was different," Dylan said simply. "She didn't act like my wheelchair was the most interesting thing about me." That night, after Dylan was asleep, Marcus sat in his home office staring at Jennifer's contact information in his phone. He'd gotten dozens of business cards and phone numbers over the years, but this felt different. This wasn't about networking or deals or expanding his company's reach. This was about his son's happiness, and maybe, just maybe, about the possibility that both of them could find something they hadn't even known they were looking for. The text came 3 days later, just as Marcus was wrapping up a quarterly budget meeting that had dragged on for 2 excruciating hours. "Hi Marcus, this is Jennifer from the networking event. Would Dylan be interested in visiting my classroom next Friday? We're studying plate tectonics, and I think he'd enjoy our earthquake simulator." Jennifer Walsh. Marcus stared at the message for a full minute before showing it to his assistant, Claire, who had been with Thompson Industries since the beginning and knew more about his personal life than most family members. "She actually followed through," Claire said, adjusting her reading glasses. "That's unexpected." "Tell me about it," Marcus replied, already typing a response. But he hesitated before sending it. What if this was just politeness? What if Jennifer regretted giving out her number and was only following through out of obligation? Dylan, however, had no such reservations when Marcus showed him the text that evening. "She has an earthquake simulator?" Dylan's eyes went wide. "Dad, you have to say yes. Please tell me you already said yes." "I wanted to check with you first," Marcus said, though he'd already mentally cleared his Friday afternoon schedule. "Check with me?" "Dad, this is the coolest thing that's happened since." Dylan trailed off, and Marcus knew he was thinking about the accident. "Since forever," Dylan finished firmly. Marcus sent the reply that night. "Dylan would love to visit. What time works best for you?" Jennifer's response came within minutes. 2:30 p.m. "I'll meet you both in the main office." Fair warning. My students might ask a lot of questions. Dylan seems like he can handle it, though. The next few days passed slowly. Dylan spent most of his free time researching earthquake detection methods and practicing explanations of tectonic theory. Marcus found himself equally nervous, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. It wasn't like this was a business meeting or a crucial presentation. It was just a classroom visit. But as Friday approached, Marcus realized what was making him anxious. This mattered to Dylan in a way that nothing had mattered since the accident. His son was excited about something again, genuinely excited, and Marcus was terrified of watching that excitement get crushed. Lincoln Middle School was a sprawling brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1960s and updated sporadically ever since. The parking lot was mostly empty at 2:30 p.m., with just a few cars belonging to teachers who stayed late for meetings or tutoring sessions. Marcus maneuvered his BMW into a spot near the accessible entrance, then helped Dylan transfer from the car to his everyday wheelchair, a lighter model that was easier to navigate in crowded spaces. The main office smelled like copy machine toner and industrial coffee. A tired-looking secretary glanced up when they entered, her expression shifting to mild surprise when she saw Dylan. "We're here to see Jennifer Walsh," Marcus said. "She's expecting us." Before the secretary could respond, Jennifer appeared from a side hallway, looking completely different than she had at the networking event. Gone was the nervous energy and distracted phone checking. In her element, she moved with confident purpose, wearing dark jeans, sneakers, and a lab coat over a t-shirt that read, "Science, it's like magic but real." "Perfect timing," Jennifer said, her smile genuine and warm. "Dylan, are you ready to see some seriously cool earthquake simulation?" Dylan nodded eagerly, but Marcus noticed he was gripping his wheelchair armrests tightly. It was his tell, the thing he did when he was excited, but also nervous about new situations. Jennifer noticed too. "Fair warning," she said, addressing Dylan directly. "My students can be pretty intense when they get excited about science. They're going to want to know everything about everything. Think you can handle that?" "I can handle it," Dylan said, his voice gaining confidence. "Good. Because I may have mentioned to them that a geology expert was coming to visit today." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Expert?" Jennifer shrugged. "Dylan knows more about seismic activity than most high school students I've taught. That makes him an expert in my book." They followed Jennifer down a hallway lined with student artwork and motivational posters. The classroom at the end was unlike any science room Marcus remembered from his own school days. Instead of rigid rows of desks, the space was arranged in flexible groupings, with lab stations scattered throughout. Posters showing the solar system, the water cycle, and geological formations covered every available wall space. But the centerpiece was clearly the earthquake simulator, a large table-like device that could shake scale models of buildings to demonstrate how different construction methods responded to seismic activity. "This is incredible," Dylan said, wheeling closer to examine the machine. "How strong can the tremors get?" "We can simulate anything up to a 7.0, Jennifer replied. "Want to see it in action?" She flipped a switch and the table began to vibrate gently. Small model buildings arranged on its surface swayed and rattled. Dylan watched with fascination as some structures remained stable while others toppled over. "The key is in the foundation and the materials," Jennifer explained. "See how the wooden buildings flex but don't break? But the rigid concrete ones crack under stress? It's like they're dancing versus fighting the earthquake," Dylan observed. "That's actually a perfect way to describe it," Jennifer said, and Marcus could hear genuine admiration in her voice. "I'm stealing that analogy for my lesson plans." The classroom door opened, and a group of about 15 middle schoolers filed in, chattering excitedly. Marcus instinctively moved closer to Dylan, old protective instincts kicking in. He'd seen how kids could react to wheelchairs, sometimes with cruel curiosity, sometimes with awkward staring, often with whispered comments that weren't as quiet as the speakers thought. But Jennifer had clearly prepared her students well. "Everyone, I want you to meet Dylan," she announced. "He's going to help us understand some advanced concepts about earthquake prediction and geology. Dylan, this is my advanced earth science class." A girl with curly red hair immediately raised her hand. "How do scientists predict earthquakes? Like, can they tell exactly when one's going to happen?" Dylan straightened in his wheelchair, suddenly in his element. "Well, they can't predict the exact moment, but they can identify areas where earthquakes are more likely to happen based on fault line activity and historical patterns." "But what about animals acting weird before earthquakes?" asked a boy with thick glasses. "My grandmother says her cats always hide before storms." "That's actually been documented," Dylan replied. "Some animals can sense P waves, the first waves that come from an earthquake, before humans can feel them. But it's not reliable enough for official prediction systems." Marcus watched in amazement as Dylan fielded question after question, his answers clear and engaging. The students hung on every word, and more importantly, they were treating Dylan like any other expert guest speaker. No one stared at his wheelchair. No one asked inappropriate questions about his disability. They were simply absorbed in learning from someone who clearly knew what he was talking about. Jennifer moved around the classroom, facilitating the discussion but letting Dylan take the lead. When one student asked about building codes in earthquake-prone areas, she nodded toward Dylan encouragingly. "In places like Japan and California, buildings have to be designed with special shock absorbers and flexible joints," Dylan explained. "It's actually really expensive, but it saves lives when the big earthquakes hit." "Have you ever been in an earthquake?" asked a quiet girl from the back of the room. Marcus tensed. This was the kind of question that could lead to uncomfortable territory. Discussions about the accident, about why Dylan was in a wheelchair, about things that were none of these kids' business. But Dylan handled it with characteristic grace. A few small ones, nothing dramatic, mostly just enough to make the dishes rattle. The girl nodded, satisfied, and moved on to asking about earthquake preparedness kits. For the next 45 minutes, Dylan held court like a visiting professor. He demonstrated how P waves and S waves traveled differently through the Earth, using a slinky Jennifer provided. He explained how the Richter scale worked and why scientists preferred the moment magnitude scale for large earthquakes. He even helped several students calculate the distance to earthquake epicenters, using arrival time differences between wave types. When the period ended and students began packing up, several approached Dylan directly. "That was so cool," said the red-haired girl. "Are you going to be a geologist when you grow up?" "Maybe," Dylan replied. "I'm thinking about it." "You should totally do it," said the boy with glasses. "You know more than our textbook." As the students filed out, calling thanks and see you later to Dylan, Marcus felt something tight in his chest finally relax. He'd spent 3 years watching his son navigate a world that often didn't know how to handle him. But these kids, they'd just seen Dylan as exactly what he was, a smart, knowledgeable person who happened to use a wheelchair. Jennifer approached as Marcus helped Dylan gather his things. "So," she said, "how do you feel about making this a regular thing?" Dylan looked up sharply. "Regular thing?" "I teach 5 earth science classes," Jennifer explained. "And after watching you today, I'm thinking my students would benefit from having a geology consultant visit once a month." Marcus closed his laptop and headed toward his son's room, ready to check on the boy who'd taught him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people see who you really are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they see something worth loving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.